The intimacy coordinator role has been in the headlines a lot lately, particularly with comments made by Gwyneth Paltrow and Mikey Madison.
If people were going method for Hamlet, they'd only play Hamlet once because you'd be dead by the end of that play.
Would you say that you are an advocate for cultural change?
Sex is political. It's always been political. I also love it when my presence means that people are able to get really creative about what's happening and not worried. I mean, I've also had some real horror stories of like people acting like my job is to make the actors do stuff.
Black women exist, plus size women exist everywhere.
And they have sex.
And they have sex!
Okay. So you said we are rolling. I looked straight down the lens.
So, welcome to We the Creators, the show that spotlights incredible talent in film, TV, and commercials. Introducing Adelaide Waldrop.
Thank you.
Your intimacy coordinating credits include working on Mickey 17, Bridget Jones's Mad About the Boy, Aftersun, The Kitchen, TV shows. We've got you, we've got Queenie. Got Star Wars, The Acolyte, Blade Runner 2099. They go on and on and on. You are one of the most in-demand intimacy coordinators working in the UK at present. And your work is shaping how we handle vulnerability, intimacy, connection, and consent on set and on screen without compromising story. So welcome!
Oh, thank you very much.
So great to have you on.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. That was such a lovely intro. And now I've remembered all the things that
Yay!
I was trying to remember when I'd worked on.
What you do is fascinating. I'm so curious. I have like a million questions for you. Today, it'd be great to sort of dig into a few of those projects, talk about the industry, talk about you a little bit more. Are you happy to like get going? I kind of want to dive straight into it and not waste a second of my time with you.
Well, and I also love getting all the questions. I get asked questions a lot, and like there's no question too out there that I like. It's part of my job is talking about my job. I think I take that very seriously. So yeah, fire away.
Sounds good. Start nice and easy. Could you give us a 30-second summary of what it is that an intimacy coordinator does?
Yeah, so I like to sort of talk about it on a spectrum in that, like, at one end you have health and safety, and the other end you have creative choreography, in the same way that you do with a stunt coordinator, right? So my job, or the job of an intimacy coordinator, is to coordinate all of the logistics around an intimate scene. And so that could be paperwork, doing a breakdown of the script, providing consent language that feeds into nudity or simulated sex writers, modesty garments, making sure people are covered appropriately, making sure there's a closed practice on set, all the way through to creative choreography and working with the director and the actors to kind of like develop the physical language of the story. My job can fluctuate between those ends depending on what the content is. And I will also say, like, when people talk about my job, it's often, you know, simulated sex, nudity, like romantic stuff, but there's so much more that falls under the umbrella of intimacy on screen. Things like familial intimacy, medical intimacy. I do a lot of sci-fi and there's all sorts of stuff that crops up in the sci-fi world. And so it really is about dealing with sort of hyper-exposed work and making sure that everyone, not just actors, but especially actors who are often the most vulnerable in this, are supported and able to approach it creatively and safely. And that the safety reinforces the creativity and makes it bigger and bolder and potentially braver if that's what folks want.
Sounds good. We're going to dig into some of those points even more as we go along. So you're actually a director too, and you started your early career acting and directing theatre. So I wanted to ask you, what was your very first encounter with intimacy on stage?
Well, it's a good question, because my first kiss was in a theatre rehearsal. I feel like this is a very sort of like theater kid kind of story. So I grew up acting at summer camp theater and Shakespeare and stuff like that. When I was 14, I was in a play, and I still remember, like, you get the script and you're like, you get given your part and you read through it and then it's like, they kiss. And I was like, and nobody talked to me about it. We rehearsed the scene and it didn't happen, me and this other, 14-year-old. And then it was one rehearsal where someone was like, oh, wait, there's a kiss here. And we were like, is there? And they were like, okay, well, let's do it again and do the kiss. And so we did it again, and we did the kiss and did like a peck. My second kiss was the same rehearsal. Someone go, okay, we're going to do that again. And we're going to go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 in a room full of teenagers. So that was my first experience as a performer with intimacy. And ultimately it's fine. And I'm like, laugh about it, rite of passage, what have you. But I think having that experience so young did inform how I approached intimacy when I started directing, because I knew that not talking about it and just having it as this sort of like, when are we going to do the kiss? Is today the day we do the kiss? Oh no, have I brushed my teeth? Like that is unhelpful, because I had experienced that firsthand at a very like awkward age.
There are many first kiss that happen on screen or on stage for the first time. I mean, is it Caleb from Stranger Things had his first kiss with Sadie Sink?
Yeah. Kirsten Dunst's first kiss was when she was 10 with Brad Pitt in Interview with a Vampire. She was 11 maybe, 10 or 11, and he was 29.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's an interesting thing. We try and separate the personal and the professional, but it is the same body that you're using. And so some of those things are true, that it's like that's your first time doing that physically as a person. I don't count that as like my first kiss for my soul, for myself, but technically speaking, it was.
Yeah. You mentioned that when you were growing up, you noticed choreographers for dance. For combat, you'd have like fight directors, but you didn't see any help for sex scenes. So for you, what was the kind of like light bulb moment where you thought this could actually be a career for you, and what made you want to sort of study it and train for it professionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it kind of happened, it happened in this funny way, because I started directing theater when I was at university. And the first play I ever did had a kiss in it, but I was like, okay, well, I know how not to do that. And then the second show I ever directed when I was 19 was a musical called Spring Awakening, which, for those who don't know it, is based on a 19th century play, but is all about perils of the absence of sex education, essentially, for some 19th century German adolescents and teens. And there's a sex scene that ends the first act and opens the second act, set to song. And I was kind of like, okay, this is my job, not the choreographer's job, not the musical director's job, okay. And at that point, realized the absence of any practice that I could find for how this should function. In Spring Awakening, it's a very sort of detailed moment around consent and whether a character is consenting, because she doesn't know what sex is and all that sort of stuff. They had this like long rehearsal with my two actors who were 18 and I was 19, and I was like, let's make sure we do this right, and choreographed it very specifically, and sort of tried to make sure that the ensemble knew when we were going to show them the choreography and build them into it, and that was a private space. And so I kind of figured out my own practice as a director at that point. And then I went on to do Hair, the musical, which has a lot of simulated sex and nudity in it, a lot of full frontal nudity. And then I directed the first part of Angels in America my last year at uni, and took that to the Fringe, and that has full frontal nudity as well and simulated sex. But I never thought at that point like, this should be a separate job. I just kind of thought, okay, I guess that's part of my job as a director. So it wasn't until I was at drama school for directing that we had a visiting practitioner who came in and was doing movement work with us. And in between uni and drama school, I'd done a lot of movement theater and devised work back in DC, where I'm from. And she came in and did some workshops with us, and then mentioned that she was starting to explore this work. And that was in spring of 2017. And I was like that was the light bulb moment where I was like, I needed that
all along.
Yeah, because you know, you do your best as a 19-year-old director, but you don't know when somebody's pulling their trousers down to expose their nudity, what they're meant to be wearing in the front that allows for that element of nudity, and how you do that. And like, you just don't know. You're kind of figuring it out. And I was like, I would really have loved to practice that could have held that for me better. So I was very lucky as to when the work kind of found me, and that it was of interest enough to me that I was like, I would like to learn from you. So I started to train with her in the autumn of 2017, and then in 2018, that's when people started becoming intimacy coordinators on screen. The work, the sort of modern practice of the work, predates that by over a decade in theater. So people were already figuring this out, and a lot of people were developing their own practice at different points. You know, and there are people who've taken on this role like in the 90s. There was stuff existing in this way. But for me, that was sort of my inroad into it, and then I was part of the first cohort of intimacy practitioners who got certified in the UK. I was very lucky to kind of be able to talk to and train with or engage with a lot of the people creating this work in different parts of the world, kind of see a pedagogy develop while I was learning it. That was also just like, from a nerdy perspective, I was like, ooh, how cool, like lots of different inroads into this and debates about what it is and isn't, and was very grateful to be part of the industry when that was happening. I don't know if that
Yes, that's great. Okay, so let's go to the industry.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit granular. Can you talk us through a typical process of yours on a production? Can we use like an example of Mickey 17 perhaps?
Yeah.
And talk from script stage to being on set. Like, what is your process?
Yeah. I'd love to talk about Mickey 17. That is one of my favorite projects I've worked on. The first thing I do is I get the script and I do a breakdown of the script. And that's where I have this gorgeous color-coded spreadsheet where I pull out every moment of intimacy or potential intimacy. Anything from like, you know, kisses on the cheek or kisses to moments that might be implied nudity or simulated sex or whatever. I pull them all out and I do an initial assessment of like what support they might need, what risks there might be, and questions I have. Because the way this stuff is scripted really varies. You know, you can have a sex scene that just says, they make love, versus a sex scene that's like, you know, she puts her hands through her hair and strokes her, like, you know, this really runs the gamut. So I have a certain like spidey sense now for like, you know, anytime there's sort of a longing embrace, I'm like, they're probably gonna kiss too. Or like, anytime there's a club scene, I'm like, are there people making out in the club? Like, I know the things now where I'm like, bathtub scenes, always got to be there for a bathtub scene. I don't care if you're shooting from here up, I'm always there for a bathtub scene. They're very complicated. So I go through and I did a whole breakdown of the script, and then the next stage is to meet with the director. So in this case, I met with director Bong Joon-ho, who is just the most wonderful creative and person. He's so collaborative, he's so open, he's so funny, he's so passionate, and he'd never worked with an intimacy coordinator before. The way that he wanted to engage with my role was a way that I actually really love to work with directors, where he was like, look, I know what I want from these scenes. I don't know what language to use or how to do this. So he was like, I want to tell you what I want, and then you go to the actors and you check and see if that's comfortable with them. If it's not, we'll adjust it, but I want to be able to just be honest with you about that. And I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's literally what you're after.
That's literally what I want, because I think sometimes people think that my job is like to protect actors from directors. In its worst version, yes, I've had to do that, of course, or vice versa. But really, it's about creating a process and being a space where everyone can be like, this is what I want to see. And I can be like, great. And then I can be like, what do you think about this? And the actor's like, not that, but that's okay. And then we like come up with a creative solution that achieves the vision whilst also working within boundaries. So he's very clear about what he wants. He also storyboards everything, which makes my job so much easier, because I'm not kind of like trying to explain, and I can literally be like, this frame needs to shift slightly so that isn't in shot. Like, everyone works the storyboard so everyone's on the same page. And then from there, once I have his vision, once I've sort of adjusted everything in my breakdown to accommodate that, that's when I talk to the performers. I'll also talk to other departments. So costume, I work really closely with costume, but often, especially with sci-fi, VFX, SFX, that sort of thing. And then I collaborate really closely with the AD team, working around how the closed set's going to be run. I work with legal to help sort of facilitate the nudity and simulated sex writer process, where I come up with all the really technical, the language I use for body parts in my job is so different from how people speak sometimes. It's also with crew sometimes, especially if you're doing anything that's really explicit or potentially traumatic. I always try and touch base with crew in advance, or get production to send a little sort of content memo to crew, just because, like, you know, you might have dailies coming in who don't know what they're going to see, and then suddenly they're watching a scene of, you know, violence over and over and over again, or, you know, ideally when my process is able to sort of breathe and I'm able to access the communication I need, the information I need, then by the time you get there on the day, everything is in place and it's just about the work. You know, none of the other variables are floating around.
I guess in addition to that, once it's in flow, I guess you're that safe person who's around. I guess your presence is known, so that if there are any issues or any kind of changing factors, you're also there to sort of manage that as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And like on the day, how I check in, it's funny, I'm working with a director at the moment who is Gen Z, and she's lovely, but she told me that apparently thumbs ups are really passive aggressive. And all I do in my job is thumbs up. That is all I do. I literally will, like, you know, you don't want to
shorthand, right? You need a quick way to communicate without words when you're rolling.
And if I'm like running in to like check in with somebody, if I'm always like, are you okay? Are you okay? Lainey, are you okay? Like, eventually you'll be like, am I okay? So instead, from a distance, I'll just be like this, and if you give me a thumbs up back, I know you're okay. You can go like this or that, or you could like say, Adelaide, I'll come over. So that's been recently haunting me. But yeah, I check in, I make sure that that, consent changes, context informs
That's what I was
consent.
going to say. It can evolve on the day depending on what's going on or how someone's feeling or what they're going through physically, mentally, emotionally.
And depending on whether or not we've had rehearsal in advance, where we've like gone through the choreography, you sometimes don't know how something is going to feel until you are feeling it, which is, where consent is, it can never be fixed. It can never be sort of guaranteed. It does have to be a constant conversation. And that is really tricky when you work in a recorded medium where, you can't withdraw your consent once the show's out in the world. Like, unfortunately, that's just not possible. Yeah. And once it's shot legally, unless it's something that's outside of the scope of your writer has agreed, like that belongs to the production. You can't be like, no, give that back. I don't want that. No, I said yes to nipple, but now I've changed my mind. The next day they'll be like, no, we own that now as per your contract. Like, and that is also kind of their right in a way, but it means that you have to really foreground the work, the preparation in advance. And also on the day, stuff always comes up, things always change, new ideas might happen, and you have to kind of negotiate that and make sure that it's still okay. It's tricky. It's a tricky old job.
Yeah.
So I'm saying it, I'm like, a lot of pressure.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot
of stress.
You were also the intimacy coordinator for Aftersun, and the father-daughter scenes have been praised for how they captured vulnerability and authenticity. How did you approach that differently? Because obviously it's non-sexual intimacy, it's familial intimacy. How did you handle that?
So it was during the pandemic. So I collaborated with a Danish intimacy coordinator, Miriam Regard, who is amazing, because the UK was red listed for Turkey where they were filming, and there was like a 2-week hotel quarantine, but not for Denmark. So basically we worked together. So she was there in person and I did a lot of the preparation, a lot of the meetings, and we collaborated to make sure that everything was sort of working properly. So I need to give her credit because she was on the ground. Frankie, who plays the daughter, that was her first acting job. So I think there was a lot that Charlotte Wells did as the director to help facilitate and create space for Frankie and Paul to have time together to like get comfortable. And if you have 2 actors playing a father and daughter and they're like, in the pool or, putting sunscreen, like, you want to ensure that everyone knows what's going to happen, everyone's considered it. I think specifically, especially with children involved, you just want to be like, have you thought about this? Like, how are you feeling about that in both directions? Because adult actors have their own feelings about, engaging in physical touch with children who aren't their family. But it was about making sure that everyone knew that there was a support system there. You want to allow the organic nature of what's scripted and the work that's already going into the characters to support that relationship, and just make sure that if there's anything more specific that needs to be covered from a safety way, you do that. So in that film, for example, when she comes in and sees her dad and he's like naked, passed out on the bed, she doesn't see that, That's just, you don't do that with child actors, obviously. The scene, the kiss by the pool, isn't a real kiss. It's a non-contact kiss. That's what we call it. So you choreograph that in a way that it looks like, I know, it's not like the primary school, like, kissing between your thumbs version. You find points of contact on the face and sort of like tilt heads in and then mask it with the arms so that it looks like people are kissing when they're not. Yeah, it's a great option to have, and one of the reasons that you need so much training to do our job is that it's really hard to choreograph that kind of stuff.
Could you give me like a summary of what qualifications and skills you need to do this?
So a fun thing in being part of this sort of community is that I was on the sort of committee of our Back2 chapter, which we started in 2020. I was the secretary until last autumn. And we came out with a registry, the Back2 registry for intimacy coordinators, which sets standards, basically. And that was partially because, producers need informed consent when they're hiring people to know what their training is. Like, producers know what we intimacy coordinators expect from one another. So the registry qualifications are sort of the thing I think of now. You definitely need a background in movement or physical storytelling of some kind. You need to, at base level, know how the body is used to tell a story. So you need to be able to choreograph. It's funny, it's a complex conversation as to whether or not you should be certified, whether you should have trained with an organization and a certifying body, or you could have mentorship one-on-one, or you can make your own patchwork of it. But you do need some intimacy-specific training. And that's so you get all of the other skills like masking nudity, how to use modesty garments and barriers, health and safety, risk assessments, breakdowns, consent level notes, all of the paperwork stuff that I do.
Things like bias training.
Well, we do.
LGBTQIA
So
plus training.
Exactly. The CPDs are extensive. So implicit bias training, bystander intervention training, LGBTQI plus, anti-racist training. Oh gosh, there's so many
Is there
more
like
that
sort
I'm
of mental health sort of
mental health
elements
first aid.
outside?
Mental health first aid is an essential part of what we do. And it's so interesting because I've worked with actors who are like, oh, really? I needed a mental health first aider. And I'm like, that's me. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Present.
And we're not mental health professionals. And that's a really important distinction. But being versed in mental health first aid means that when you are working with vulnerable content or potential like things that could trigger past trauma or provoke like a traumatic response, you're able to handle it in the moment and you're able to signpost towards professional help. But it's really important that people know we aren't therapists because there is stuff that is better suited for a child psychologist or, you know, a drama therapist. But mental health first aid is a huge part of what we do.
Would you say that you are an advocate for cultural change, or do you just see yourself as somebody who likes to do really incredible intimacy choreo?
Definitely the former. I think sex is political. It's always been political. I'd like to think there's a point at which it won't be, but I doubt that. And talking about consent, talking about agency, personal safety, all of that is inherently political. And I see activism and advocacy and organizing as well, like being part of Back 2 of our crew union. All of those feel very integral to the role and the tenets of the work. And I personally feel like integrity in this work is really important. That's why I try and be so honest and transparent. That's why I try and just be myself, because I think that you have to sort of understand what this work is founded on and what got us here. And all of the sex positive activists and feminists and queer folks and, you know, people from global majority backgrounds who have been speaking about all of these things that then come into play of how we receive and shape these scenes and talk about human sexuality and who we are. So I'm not sure every intimacy coordinator would say that, but I don't see how you could do this work without being politically informed and having a bit of an activist mindset, because you are an advocate for people at the end of the day, and you're an advocate for a process and for an ethos. Yeah.
Great answer. Great answer. The intimacy coordinator role has been in the headlines a lot lately, particularly with comments made by the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow and Mikey Madison, which to me must reflect this notion that there's still a sentiment of like resistance towards the role and perhaps a lack of understanding. So I'd like to ask you, what would you say is the biggest misconception about your role and what you think about all of that?
The biggest misconception is that we come in and we make everything worse. We make it seem more difficult. We make things feel loaded that aren't. We take a bunch of time. We take the project or the scene away from the director and the actors and tell them how to do their jobs. That we minimize the intimacy, that we make it less, you know, bold, daring, out there, whatever. Or that we get in the way of like natural chemistry or like the realistic nature of it. But when you talk about sort of realism or method or whatever, there's a boundary to realism with everything. If people were going method for Hamlet, they'd only play Hamlet once because you'd be dead by the end of that play. And like we understand for the most part, I think the edges of realism with violence, like you're not going to be, you know, fighting with real sharp swords. You're not going to be doing that. But there is some element of choreographed violence that is, you know, you get pushed on the stage, you're getting really pushed, hopefully never getting really punched. With intimacy, like there are elements that are real, like kissing. That's a real, unless you're doing one of those non-contact kisses, like it's real contact that happens. But the sexual action is not real and shouldn't be. And I always find it interesting because actors are so practiced at making things seem real that aren't. Making it seem like their characters are just saying these words, that they haven't memorized them from a script, pretending that there isn't like a camera there, like all of this stuff. And the idea that sexual intimacy in particular needs to be real, I think actually just belies the fact that that people aren't used to having it be choreographed and they're used to just going for it. And and with my job, like I've worked with actors where they want the kiss choreographed very specifically. You know, when our head's turning, we chart it with breath, the hands move with that. Versus other actors who are like, we got it, thanks. And I'm like, great. And then I'm just there with mints. Or sometimes for some kiss scenes, I'm not there at all because I've spoken to them both. I understand that they feel comfortable within the scope of what's scripted. I've spoken to the director. I know that they're going to keep it within that framework. And then it's like, fine. And then I check in after and I'm like, how was the kiss scene today? Like, great. Anything that requires a closed set, I need to be there for because it is my responsibility, even if the actor is like, it's fine, I don't really want you to talk to me, look at me, whatever, I'm like, that, no problem. I will just make sure everything is, it's like being a fire marshal at that point. It's like, is there an open flame? I will be there to watch the open flame. This role was already being sort of explored and founded before the Me Too movement, but with the Me Too movement, it got thrust into the spotlight, and suddenly there was a huge amount of demand, huge amount of discussion about the risks and the needs and that kind of thing, particularly like within our industry. A lot of resistance was because people didn't know what it was or didn't have any experience with it. So there were a lot of assumptions that were just based on nothing or word of mouth or whatever. And I do think what's interesting about the recent pushback is that it seems to be slightly more informed by people having negative experiences with intimacy coordinators. There are also people who unfortunately do this work without proper training and without, an ethical or informed approach. Even with the best of intentions, that can do a lot of harm. But generally, I think, you should be able to speak to any intimacy coordinator at the start of a process, and that IC should say, well, how do you like to work? What kind of support do you want on the day? What would or wouldn't be helpful for you? And have that conversation, likewise with the director, likewise with the first AD, so that it is collaborative and you're not operating on assumptions in either direction. I think that's really important.
What has been the most positive reaction to having you on set, and what has been the most negative?
The most positive reaction. I mean, I think the most positive reaction is maybe not relief. I don't know why that came to mind, but when I see people, like, when I see a weight lifted off of someone's shoulders, be that a producer who's like, I don't know how to put this language in the writer, or I don't know what I need to do here, or a director who's like, I just want to be able to talk about what I want the scene to look like without worrying about the words I'm using, or the power dynamic of me saying that directly to the actor, or the actor just being like, I don't want to do this, I want to do that, and then I'm like, okay. And then when I see relief or ease, then for me, that's the best sign that I have taken away some of the worry or feeling of responsibility or overwhelm that this expertise that other people don't have can sometimes provoke. And then I also love it when my presence means that people are able to get really creative about what's happening and not worried, like where it's actually like, what is the story here? And like, what are the sort of really juicy like moments or textures of it? I love that when it feels like everything gets more creative and less stressful.
And the worst? What was the worst?
Oh,
Has there been like a singular one reaction?
When people refuse to talk to me or can't make time for me or are kind of like, it's fine. Like, I don't know. I don't want to talk. Like, I'm trying to provide some kind of service or support as a creative who's like at an HOD level. And when I'm just like iced out, be that by a second AD, a director, like an actor who just refuses to talk to me, I feel like I go crazy because I'm like, I don't know what you want. I'm not trying to do anything other than have a conversation. You can be part of determining how that goes. I mean, I've also had some real horror stories of like people acting like my job is to make the actors do stuff, to like manipulate the actors into doing what they want. Yeah, that's really bad. But that's also like, where they're like, well, what are you here for if not to make this work? And I'm like, oh, honey, what do you mean? But yeah.
One more question before a quick fire round.
Okay.
Let's talk about this idea of offers. Obviously, we've spoken about like this rhetoric around people thinking that intimacy coordinators are like stifling creativity. Yeah. And actually, when it comes to offers, it's the complete opposite of that. So could you speak a little bit on what you mean by offer, what that might look like, and how an offer could potentially bring more depth to the creative, bring more depth to the story, and actually progress it further?
It's much more of a sort of like shaping and molding, I guess. And within that, I like to make offers that might help people feel like, oh, there are more options there. It's scripted as like a kiss, but what if it started as sort of like, a kiss on the cheek or a caress, or like, how does the eye contact function? Like, you kind of zoom in on some of the details and zoom out to look at the shape of it. It's about sort of offering things when other people might feel vulnerable, saying like, I think this is what happens. There's because we map people's personal preferences onto intimate action all the time, which we don't do with violence. Nobody's like, oh, you really wanted to kill him, right? But they're always like, oh, I bet you really liked kissing that person. And it's like, come on, it's acting. Yeah. So sometimes it can feel vulnerable to say like, I think they should do this. I think the positioning should be this, because someone could be like, why?
And how about like, you've spoken a bit about, we don't see condoms on screen and things like that. Like, how can offers actually push things so that we're not seeing the same old,
Oh my gosh,
and we're like opening things up to kind of reflect reality a bit more? What do you have to say about that?
Well, you see my physicality. I'm like, well, girl, Because my background is directing, it is important that in my role as an intimacy coordinator, I know that that's not the hat I wear. So I don't get to always make those decisions. I'm not in the edit. I don't decide what take goes forward. If I'm like on a job where I might go to a script supervisor and be like, take 3 was the best for the intimacy coordinator, just so you know.
Just saying.
It really depends on my relationship with the other creatives involved, particularly the directors. Fun fact is that the first project I have ever, in all the years I've been doing this, gotten a condom choreographed into came out this February.
Yay.
My Fault London.
Because we just don't see them, right? They don't exist. People don't use
I've worked on
condoms
one
screen,
scene
apparently.
with lube, ever, I think. Condoms you do not see. And what was so great about that job and working with directors was that I think on some projects the intimacy is treated as like secondary or like a function, like, and that is true sometimes. It's like you have a script and that's the script. With something like My Fault, which is it's very sensual, kind of erotic, young love thriller with fast cars. And so the physical intimacy and the like chemistry between these characters, there's an element of like forbidden love, is the point. I was very lucky to be involved in that in a really collaborative creative process. There's only a few jobs where I've had like research folders and like done sketches of shapes of choreography. Because it also has a younger audience, I was like, can we please get a condom in here? And the directors were like, yes, absolutely. I love it because it's just a brief little moment and it moves out of frame and it's nothing where it's like stopped and like made a comedy beat, but it's also natural and normal. And I think there is a sort of higher social, cultural responsibility I feel in this job because of how many people get their sexual education from media, from TV, from movies. I know that gave me my own misconceptions growing up of what my physiology should or shouldn't be able to do. You know, the notorious like sex up against the wall, 3 thrusts and then a female orgasm happens. And it's like, wow, that is not how most people's bodies work.
Absolutely. I think back to my sexual education, it was non-existent. I moved around schools for secondary school and
really?
in primary school, they had sex education for like an hour, but I was off sick that day, so I missed it. Went to the next school, they did it the term before. And so that just never happened, never got anything from my parents. Wow. So you are just picking up all the messages from film and television. Subconsciously, you're just taking it all in and internalizing what you see. Completely. And then when your personal experiences that you have in life don't reflect what you see, there's this sort of disparity, which can be kind of disconcerting.
People can be more aware of that. It's just the cutting of corners. It's the sort of like, oh, that's too complicated. Like when I've tried to propose condoms in sex scenes that were similarly with like younger people, like, oh, the condom's implied. The condom's implied. And I was like, how? Can we have a crinkle sound? And it's not just condoms. It's things like clitoral stimulations. It's things like accurately representing queer sex or disabled sex or non-normative sex.
Different
like,
representations of sex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it feels kind of quite singular.
I still have yet to do a sex scene with 2 fat actors.
And I was going to say...
Like, ever.
Yeah, with Wunmi Masaku from Sinners, she's obviously a beautiful, dark-skinned, plus-size black woman. She's the love interest, and there's a sex scene, and I thought it was interesting that there was so much discourse around that, because I'm like, it's 2025, how is it that is groundbreaking? That is mind-blowing to me because black women exist, plus-size women exist everywhere.
And they have sex.
Happily. They have sex. So I was like, though I'm so delighted it was in there and I loved it, I'm like, I don't get why it still hasn't been normalized.
But also I think there is this element sometimes when I talk with actors about what parts of their body they want to show on screen, and I never need to know why a boundary exists, but if people want to share them with me, they're welcome to. But like, there is this element of kind of representation, I suppose, and like being the sacrificial lamb sometimes of like, okay, so you've got stretch marks. You could show those on camera in a way that's like super empowering, but then you are putting yourself out there to all the vulnerabilities. I was sort of the age when Girls came out on HBO. I've worked with Lena Dunham since, and I just think she's such a brilliant creative, but in her role as Hannah on that show, I remember there's that episode with her and Patrick Wilson, this like hot older doctor, and her character's like, there's a lot of nakedness walking around, and there was so much like backlash at the time of like, what? Like, why have they spent this whole episode doing that? And it's like, to be vulnerable in a space of representation, like there is a bravery to that. And, you know, to ask an actor to, there are actors I've worked with where they're like, I I hate, like, there's an apology, but also a, like, I just don't want this little bit of my tummy to show. And I'm like, I get it. Like, I can't say that if, you know, the tables were turned, I would be like, show my belly. Like, you know, but also I do think that we're doing a disservice to younger people, particularly in an internet age where young people aren't having physical sexual experiences as early. It's much more stifled and much more online. And, you know, you see that in everything, filters and everything. So it's something that I really like to strive for, and even just tiny little beats that can give a little more authenticity and a little more interest wherever I can. But unfortunately, I'm not queen of the universe. I don't get to control all of these things.
Okay, so we will go to a quick fire round. First thing that pops into your head, just say it.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. What's the last show that you binge watched?
Buffy.
If someone had a crystal ball and could predict the future with 100% accuracy, would you ask them a question? And if so, what would it be?
Oh my gosh.
Would you ask them, do you think?
No. I don't think I could handle it.
Play with that. Okay.
No.
If you had to give a TED talk with zero preparation time and you couldn't talk about anything related to film, TV, or theatre, what would you pick as your topic?
Wow. First thing popped into my head, my degree is in Latin literature.
Wow.
So
I love
I could
Latin.
probably riff on Catullus for a bit.
Oh, I really love Latin. I'd be into that. If you could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be?
Oh gosh, probably better self-discipline.
It's a good one. What's one habit you'd like to break?
Procrastination.
What's something that brings you joy?
Ice cream.
Standard.
And cats.
Oh. What's the wildest thing on your bucket list?
Probably skydiving.
Nice.
It's sort of basic, but I've wanted to do it since I was a kid.
It was on mine, and then I grew older and it's come off because, you know, the fear creeps in as you get older. And now
Bungee
I'm like,
jumping
no.
is not on my list.
No.
Skydiving, I think I'm still holding
there.
on to.
I'm too chicken now.
Yeah.
What's the biggest myth about success that you think needs to be debunked?
Other people's successes don't equal your failures. And I think the sort of idea that it's a limited pool and you gotta step on other people so that they don't take things from you. And also that success is, especially when you're freelance, that success is like you've made it and then that's you. I'm freelance. I'm terrified all the time. All the time. So yeah, I think those are the two.
What's your relationship to failure?
I think my relationship to failure is really fraught, but also I've learned how important and how helpful it is and how much more you learn when you fail. And when you allow yourself to fail and to actually kind of stare directly into the sun of that failure and be like, okay, what went wrong? And like, where do I go from here? That doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. And I do love to bludgeon myself with it or, you know, be paralyzed with fear. But I think also with my job, I constantly am having to kind of dive in head first and like hope it goes well. And so risking failure is a practice. It's a daily practice. And you won't get anywhere big without really practicing a resilience to knowing that that's a risk and living with it and appreciating it.
Love that. It's a practice. Taking that. What's your relationship to rejection?
Similarly fraught, I would say, but also, yeah, I think I've actually gotten to the place with rejection where I've had some really key turning points in my life that were sort of predicated on being rejected from one thing and turning to another that ended up being the best thing for me. The sort of side quests that happen when you're rejected from one thing actually, for me, have been some of the most important directional changes in my life in a really good way.
Side quest.
Yeah.
I love that.
Makes it sound
That
like I
sounds so
play video
exciting.
games,
Yes,
but I don't.
it
I just
sounds-
watch my partner play Zelda.
Sounds so exciting. What's one thing you've seen another director do that you thought, that is amazing, I'm stealing that?
There's something I envy, because obviously I'm a very talkative person. I envy when directors are able to sort of condense everything down into this one note and they just like give it. And then you see it kind of like, I think I can have that impact by like talking around it from every different direction.
What director would you say has done that?
It was John Crowley who I saw. I worked with him on Life After Life and then again on an episode of Black Mirror, Beyond the Sea, the one with Josh Hartnett and Aaron Paul. And I saw him give a note during an intimate scene in Life After Life. It was just such an insightful, specific, eloquent note about one of the characters' sort of journeys of like discovery and pleasure in the scene, given so beautifully. And I just remember being like, oh, okay. Wow. And I think that's something that I really love about my job is getting to work with directors who are incredibly talented.
I love being a director, but it's the one role where you don't get to see other directors working.
I get to work with a variety of directors and get insight into their processes. And also I think coming up in theater and, you know, being a theater director by trade, really, it's always interesting to me the variation you get when people direct for screen. Some directors do not know how to give notes for performance, but they know everything about the camera.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of, it really runs the gamut. Sometimes you see some people where you're like, how did you get this job? Like, here I am with my MA stuck in my back pocket, like, okay, yeah, you go off, Queen, like, you direct, go for it. So nasty. Demystifies it. It's good. It makes you realize that, like, it's not only, you know, the best of the best at the tippy top, that there's some variety there as well.
Yeah. How do you stay inspired?
My friends, also just watching things I like, not feeling pressured to watch what everyone else is watching. I have really interesting, diverse community of people, and going to see things that, like going into a used bookshop with one of my good friends is some of the best.
I love bookshops. Right. Love them.
I went to this one for the first time, Bookmongers, because I live north, and I sat in the back and I read the Encyclopedia Britannica for a bit, because they had a whole set of encyclopedias.
God, that sounds amazing to me.
And I was like, I want encyclopedias.
I feel like I exhale when I go into a bookshop.
Yeah, and the smell, and this was one with like a cranky cat and a sofa at the back, and the dude was like, you know, and you just like go through and like see what things you can find. You know, I think the internet has broken my brain in so many ways, like everyone, but like as a kid, my parents had a lot of really interesting, and my parents are a huge part of why I am as weird and wacky as I am. I think about going in their rooms and reading things and finding stuff. I love it. And you don't do that on the internet because you can just find anything.
What question haven't I asked that you wish I had?
I don't know what my dream project would be as a director, because I think that's really changed since I started doing this work.
Okay.
I think that before I just sort of happened to direct projects or work on projects that dealt with things that felt more extreme, which included intimacy. And now I think there's a change in all of the work that I've done that means that what I would be interested in showing on screen is very different now because of the intimacy coordination career.
I can imagine. That's really interesting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Something I'm really realizing is how much I need to be doing my own creative work alongside this role, speaking personally, like because I don't control everything, or, you know, necessarily people don't always want my creative input, like having an outlet for that that's mine is very important. I'm a little jaded about certain genres and styles of things that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, and things that I feel are missing that we aren't going back towards. So I think a lot about Pee Wee Herman lately. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot about the more eccentric, intentionally stylistic, but not in like a cool way, stuff that was able to be much more incisive or cutting edge because it was silly or because it was weird. And I think there's a certain flavor of thing we're seeing across genres. It's that prestige kind of, you know, lighting. It's got green undertones, you know. That's sort of what I think about.
Great answer to your great question. And very lastly, what are you looking forward to?
Well, on the note of things that bring me joy, I have recently been given permission by my landlord to have a cat. So my partner and I are waiting to hear about a little local Stoke Newington kitten that maybe needs a home. But if not, maybe we'll find a different kitten. So I am really, really looking forward to having a cat. I go insane without animal companionship. I befriended a squirrel last year.
Oh my God.
Yeah. She came to my balcony and I'd give her nuts out of my hand. Yeah. Like crazy Snow White vibes.
Apparently I have squirrels coming to my loft, apparently.
Really?
Yeah, which kind of freaks me out, but I'm sure you'd open the hatch and let them in, wouldn't you?
You want them to be invited. It's like vampires. You need to invite them into the space. They shouldn't just be coming in of their own accord. So yeah. Consent is important.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You've been so generous with your time and your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Such wonderful questions and such a lovely discussion. I really appreciate your time and lovely chatting with you.
Yay, great.
Thank you